Amazing. Why don't we return to our seats? But let's remain standing, if we would, for the reading of God's word. Danny is going to come and read to us this morning. Danny, over to you.
Okay, the reading today is taken from the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verses 1 through 19. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon, Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord.
Amazing. Thank you, Danny. Let's pray. Jesus, you said you came to give us fullness of life. And I pray that as we preach and hear your word this morning, Father, would our hearts be sensitive to the speaking of your voice, to the leading of your Spirit. Would they be malleable? Would they be sensitive to you and open to the transformation and the power of your Spirit, Father? Help us to become more like you as we listen this morning, Jesus. Amen. The author and poet Joshua Luke Smith says this: "Forgiveness isn't fair. No one deserves it. That's the point. It's a gift that you can't earn. Unlike responsibility or trust, forgiveness is freely given, but it's expensive. It will cost you your desire for justice. It will cost you the power you feel by wielding resentment over someone. And sometimes when you've been greatly hurt by another, that power can feel good. But it would also cost you who you don't want to be. It will cost you to become someone who's tormented inside, someone who sees the face of the perpetrator on everybody else because you never release them. Unforgiveness locks the person who hurt you in a prison cell. The only problem is you're locked in there with that person. There is no version of our lives without suffering, without being hard done by and hurt by others. Forgiveness empowers us to become someone who is truly free within it. This morning we are continuing, as Irene said, our live series looking at the Gospels and exploring different encounters with the resurrected Jesus. What did it look like? What took shape? What happened when people encountered the resurrected King? And today we are zooming in on an encounter that the Apostle Peter has with Jesus. And I'm talking to you this morning about one of the most central, most important, most powerful, but perhaps also the most difficult aspects of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. We're going to be talking about forgiveness. Forgiveness, or the lack thereof, can be the greatest source of either freedom or bitterness in our lives. Both the extent to which we know we've been forgiven, but also the extent to which we're able to forgive other people. We've all been hurt by people. We have all suffered at the hands of someone else. We've all hurt other people ourselves. None of us is really off the hook. Even as I mentioned forgiveness, the likelihood is for lots of us, someone has already come into your mind. Someone who has wronged you, someone who has done something they shouldn't have done. Maybe they haven't owned it yet. Maybe they haven't apologized. Maybe they'll never apologize. Maybe they haven't seen justice yet. They haven't had to pay a price for what they've done wrong. Maybe you're already entertaining a conversation in your head about what circumstances might enable you to find it in your heart to forgive them, but until then, it's just a pipe dream. How often can we struggle to let go of the anger in which unforgiveness loves to brood and stagnate? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says these words. He says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' which was an ancient Aramaic word for contempt." It's a rude word, actually. But I'm sure you've all heard worse. Anyone who says to a brother or sister, "Raka," is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, "You fool," will be in the danger of the fire of hell. I've definitely heard worse than that. But here Jesus is taking the Mosaic law that was given centuries ago and which addresses people's behavior. Do this, don't do that. Here's how you have a good functioning society. We were given the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder, as he's talking about. And throughout the Sermon on the Mount, rather than undermine the Mosaic law, Jesus actually intensifies the Mosaic law in a number of different ways. Jesus addresses not primarily the behavior of his followers, the symptom, but is addressing the issues of the human heart from which the behaviors flow. Like Jesus is going straight after the heart. And as he's talking about anger, in the Greek there are a number of different words for anger. There's the word thumos, which is the type of anger that flares up in a moment of passion, but it dies down pretty quickly. Like when you're walking and you stub your little toe, and it's just like, oh, it's so angry, and it's always the little one. Why is it always the pinky? But this is a type of anger, and in your anger, you shout a word that maybe you probably wouldn't be teaching children to say, but it flares up and it dissipates quickly. But this anger is not the one that Jesus is referring to here in the Sermon on the Mount. The word he uses for anger is orgizomenos. Great word. Everyone say orgizomenos. Thank you. Great word. This anger is an anger that is consistently being provoked and stoked in you. It's an anger that broods over time. It's an anger where you begin to nurture it and you entertain it and you dwell on it, and it sits there like a stagnant water that becomes a well of bitterness. Orgizomenos is the anger that makes you start ruminating on something that has happened in your life over and over, playing it over and over in your mind. When you start ruminating on how someone has wronged you, how they spoke to you, or how they betrayed you or humiliated you, and then in your anger you start role-playing how you would have had that conversation next time. Next time I'm going to say this, and next time I'm going to say that. And the next time I'm going to confront them in a public place and completely and utterly humiliate them. And then my work will be finished. And it's a conversation that you know is never going to happen, but you're playing it over and over in your mind. You know, next time they won't know what's coming for them. And orgizomenos just grows and grows inside of you. The bitterness grows in our hearts to the point where even the potential of their ill fortune brings us a slight level of delight. And I'm making light of it a little bit, but only say we all know what I'm talking about. We all have a moment where we're like, yep, been there before. That is the anger that Jesus is addressing here, orgizomenos. And Jesus goes after it in a big way. He goes so far as to say that those living with this anger are in the danger of the fire of hell. Such is the destructive nature of this anger. It's an anger that is the opposite of forgiveness. And it's an anger that can both be directed at those who have hurt us, but also that can be turned in on itself, in self-loathing and self-pity and regret and shame. And in the passage in John 21 that we just read out loud, you can imagine the Apostle Peter having this anger and this bitterness both with the world, but also with himself. Here was a man who had left everything behind to follow Jesus. One of Jesus' closest friends. He was one of the inner circle in Jesus' life, one of his most committed followers and staunchest defenders. You know, and I have a bit of a soft spot for Peter. Like, I think it's fair to say he was a bit of the hothead of the group. You know, he has this impulsive streak, which I definitely identify with. He says what he means, and he means what he says, for better or worse. And this impulsive streak in Peter leads to some like incredibly miraculous moments of faith, but also some moments that I'm sure Peter would rather forget. You know, throughout the Gospels, one of these incredible moments, you know, it's Peter who calls out to Jesus in the middle of the storm when they're out at sea, like, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Like this amazing display of faith. He knows that Jesus is God. So in the midst of the storm, he says, Jesus, if it is you in that storm, tell me to come to you on the water. And he actually does it. He actually steps out of the boat and miraculously walks on the water. However, then just before Jesus was crucified, we also read another story of Peter, where the Jewish high priest who comes with soldiers to arrest Jesus, and Peter, who apparently now has a sword, which to me was a bit of a plot twist, I don't know where he got that from, but jumps forward and chops the ear off the high priest who is trying to come and take Jesus away. Like Jesus has spent 3 years of his life teaching them the ways of the upside down kingdom of faith, the way of non-violence and turning the other cheek. And the moment it gets hairy, Peter is literally trying to chop off heads. Like, I'm assuming he missed. I don't think he's either very accurate or he missed. I don't know. It's one or the other. When Jesus is having his last meal with the disciples, he's at the Last Supper, and we see Jesus and Peter have this exchange. Then Jesus told them, this very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. Like Peter, true to form, is bringing the sass again and says, even if all fall away, even if all these other featherweight disciples, these part-time, like you can imagine them being sat around the table just like, Peter, like, dude, we're right here. Like, hello. You know, even if all these featherweight disciples, even if these part-timers, even if they all leave you, I never will. I'll sooner die than disown you, Jesus. And I've got to be honest again, I really relate to Peter. Like, I really do. Like, I'm an all or nothing character. I'm all in. I don't know if any of, have we got, you know what I mean? Have we got any all or nothing, yeah, nice, strong, a few hands. All or nothing characters in the room, like Peter, like me. Like, I can definitely be overly impulsive at times. I wouldn't say it's one of my better personality traits. I don't know if you've ever had a moment of like impulsively being all in on something. I remember, Bridge kindly reminded me of it. I remember Lent last year, where we were talking about fasting, and I was like excited to fast, and I thought, well, if we're gonna fast, like, let's do it. I was a bit melodramatic with it, classic. I'm gonna fast just like everything for 40 days or whatever. And then like by day 3, you're at home in a bath of chocolate, like feeling comforted but ashamed, is probably fair to say. Anyway, that's like the contrast to this moment. Peter boldly and publicly proclaiming that he'd sooner die than disown Jesus. And then we read just a few verses later in John's gospel, after Jesus has been taken away, Peter stands around a fire with Roman and Jewish officials and disowns Jesus not once, but 3 times, denying that he even knew him. And then he stands from afar, far away enough to save his own skin, and watches as Jesus, one of his closest friends, suffers death on a cross. Like, this is the story of Peter. And then in the passage we've just read, we see Peter there saying, I'm going out to fish. Like, in his head, Jesus is dead. Like, the game's up, the adventure is over, and Peter returns to the only thing he feels like he knows how to do, fishing. And he returns full of shame, full of regret. Like, you can imagine, like, just the pain of that night. It says they fished all night and caught nothing. Like, what a long night that must have been. Like, you're out on the boat, imagine it, you're out on the boat in the dead of night, not a single fish in sight, and you're just replaying the events of the last week over and over again. The person you thought had come to change the world, the person you left everything for, that you followed through thick and thin for 3 whole years, but then you stood from afar and watched them be nailed to a cross, a public death of humiliation and shame. Like, you were one of his best friends. And in his greatest hour of need, after all your bluster, after all your public declarations of loyalty, you are nowhere to be seen. Not only in hiding, but explicitly and publicly denying that you even knew him. And so what do? You go back to the only thing you know how to do. You go out and fish. And you sit there all night in the quiet, replaying the moments over and over in your head. Orgis omenos. You know, the moment you stood up and made these big declarations, the moment you deny that you even knew him, the moment you abandon him. Like, how on earth, genuinely, how on earth do you ever come back from that? How on earth would he ever forgive you? How on earth would you ever forgive yourself? Like, you can't believe who you have proven yourself to be. And in the unashamed culture of the ancient Middle East, where loyalty is so highly valued, it's really tough to comprehend the shame of what Peter has done. That how does he move forward with life? The assumption culturally would be that Peter would never be forgiven, that he'd never be able to forgive himself. And it might be that actually some of you here today feel something similarly about your own past. There are things you've done, there are people you've hurt, and the memory and the shame of those things is darkening your life. And you are struggling to live with yourself. You feel chained to the mistakes and the failures of your past. And even for those of us who don't feel like we have something as significant as that, we all know that we have parts of our lives that we're ashamed of, stuff we prefer to keep in the shadows. There are parts of our lives, whether they be thoughts or actions, that if all of a sudden they were on a highlight reel on the screen behind me, all those things we keep in the shadows, if they were being played on the screen, we'd all make a beeline for that door. Well, if that's you, you are in good company with the Apostle Peter. And it's at this point in John chapter 21 that a man on the shore tells them, the experienced fishermen, to take their nets and throw them onto the other side of the boat. You know, they've got nothing to lose. It's been a long night, so they give it a go. And before you know it, the nets are bulging and bursting with fish. And they have seen this kind of miraculous provision of fish before. And immediately they realize that the resurrected Jesus is the one calling to them from the shore. And true to form, again in classic Peter fashion, ever the impulsive one, he grabs his garment and he jumps into the water to swim to Jesus as fast as he can. Like, he just has to get to him. Again, you can imagine the other disciples in the boat just like, all right, I guess we'll bring the fish in then, Peter. Cheers, mate. But Peter can't help himself. He just has to get to Jesus. And I just want to stop for a moment. For all his flaws, of which we have seen there are many, there is something to learn from Peter in this moment. If ever you need evidence as to the kindness and the graciousness of Jesus Christ, if I was Peter, if I had made the statements that he'd made, if I had denied Jesus in the way he had abandoned him in his hour of need, and then I knew that Jesus was on the shore, I think I'd be tempted to cower in shame. I think I'd be like looking to hide amongst the fish, like slipping down in the boat. You know when you avoid eye contact with someone, you're just like, I don't think they've seen me, and just hope that they go past. But there is no doubt in Peter's mind as to the kindness and the graciousness of the one he is swimming toward. You know, after 3 years of walking with him in the flesh, he is utterly convinced of the grace and the goodness of this person. Like, friends, may we be more like Peter. May we do whatever we need to do to get to Jesus, to be with him, to abide in him, to love him, to know him. I promise you, it is the best thing about life, is the resurrected Jesus Christ. And one day you will experience a fullness of communion with him, and you will be overjoyed, but you'll also be shocked like, oh, this was available all along. This level of communion, it's available to you. May we be more like Peter and do whatever we need to do. Push people out the way. Jump in the water. Step out the boat. But I promise you, you will encounter a strong but gentle and kind and gracious person full of goodness and truth. It'll be the best decision you've ever made. May we all be as eager to come to Jesus as Peter is here. They all get to the shore and they see that Jesus has made a fire. And they sit around this fire, and we see this interaction between the resurrected Jesus and the apostle Peter. Now, the last time Peter was gathered around a fire, as we just said a few chapters earlier, he was stood with Roman officials, and he stands there and denies that he ever knew Jesus at all. Not once, but 3 times. And a week later, after denying him around a fire, Peter sits around another fire. And Jesus himself turns and sets his gaze on the apostle Peter. And Jesus does exactly what he often does with us in our own pain. He goes straight to the heart of the wound to perform heart surgery. After everything Peter has done, Jesus doesn't avoid it. He doesn't bypass Peter's sin. He doesn't bypass Peter's pain and his shame, but confronts Peter in his pain. Again, he goes after the heart. There is no cheap grace on offer here. Peter was asked 3 times if he knows Jesus, and 3 times denied him. And then 3 times Jesus asks Peter if he loves him. Like Jesus has the surgeon's knife and is going straight for the wound to remove the infection, remove the shame, remove the orgis omenos that is going to kill Peter if it isn't healed. And this is what he often does with us. You know, in our shame or bitterness, in goes the surgeon's knife to get out whatever it is that is going to hurt you in the long run, to bring it into light, to bring it into freedom. Jesus' first question, he asked Peter, do you love me more than these? And it's not just do you love me, it's comparative. It's a comparative question. Do you love me more than these, more than the other disciples present? And it's a reminder from Jesus. It's like, remember before it was you who stood up in front of everyone and said that even if everyone else fell away, you would never abandon me. You said you'd rather die. Like Jesus again is going straight for this wound. Like, Peter, are you still saying to me you are more loyal than anyone else? And Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. You know, Jesus asked Peter if he loves him 3 times, and it's like 3 times Jesus is saying to Peter, like, you failed me. He deals head on with the reality of Peter's failure. And by the 3rd time, it seems Peter has let him into the wound. It says Peter was hurt. Peter was grieved, I think, in the translation. Because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? You know, this is the wound from a friend who tells you what you don't want to hear, so that you can bring your pain and your failure into the light of his presence. And on the 3rd time of asking, in the midst of his pain, Peter simply says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. When the surgeon's knife goes in, you have to respond in a way that is going to heal you and not just wound you further. When the knife goes in on the surgeon's table, you have to not move, right? That's why they sedate us. And what do I mean by that? In 2 Corinthians 7 verse 10, Paul writes about the difference between godly sorrow and worldly sorrow. He writes this, he says, godly sorrow brings about repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret. But worldly sorrow brings death. Like worldly sorrow is like kind of like this remorse that leads to being more wounded. I don't know if you've ever seen someone feel sad after doing something wrong, but they're not sad because they've hurt someone. They're sad because they got caught. Their sadness is rooted in the fact that they're now having to suffer the consequences of their actions rather than a godly remorse for the things they've done and the hurt they've caused. Like godly sorrow brings about freedom, where worldly sorrow brings about more pain. And in this encounter Peter has with Jesus under the surgeon's knife, not once does Peter make excuses. Not once does he center the story on his own self-pity or on his own regret. Like godly sorrow is when God goes in with the surgeon's knife and we lie still on the table knowing that he has to go into the wound to heal the wound. Peter is sad over Jesus' sadness, not his own. And because of that, every time Jesus addresses Peter's sin, addresses his failure, Peter simply acknowledges it and declares his ongoing love for Jesus. And the beautiful thing is you'll notice each time Peter responds in this conversation, Jesus simply says, feed my sheep or tend to my sheep. Now this is, in that context, this is shepherding language, which would have been understood as leadership in that context. So this is this beautiful picture of how God, even as he addresses our failure, restores us to a position of grace, even after we've sinned against him, even after we've turned our backs on him. The second Peter responds with godly sorrow, Jesus responds with a deep love and an affirmation of the call on his life. And maybe that's the affirmation you need, is the affirmation from God. It doesn't matter, you're not chained to those mistakes of the past. He wants to affirm his call on your life. Like, this is the gospel of grace. The more you see your sin, the more life-giving Jesus' grace is. Jesus is essentially saying, Peter, you failed me, you abandoned me, but if you plunge your failure into my grace, you are still the one who will lead. Your future is still safe in my hands. You are still called not just to be a fisherman, but a fisher of men. Step up and feed my sheep. Look after my people. Take charge and lead. That this is the upside down kingdom of God. In this kingdom, the greatest in this kingdom are the chief repenters. The ones who know how desperately they need the grace of God. The ones who know how weak they are. There is no one who is beyond the grace of God, who cannot recover their calling and their purpose in him. The biggest failures, plunged into the grace of Jesus Christ, will make you the greatest of leaders. You know, at the end of this passage, we read these kind of cryptic statements. Jesus tells Peter to feed his sheep one more time, and then he says this: very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. To have your hands stretched out, as Jesus says, was a first century metaphor for crucifixion. So Jesus tells Peter how he was going to die, and that he too was going to be crucified. And the tradition is that Peter was crucified at the end of his life, but he was crucified upside down because he didn't deem himself worthy to die the same death as Jesus. So he tells him how he's going to die, and then he says, follow me. And in response to the compelling, beautiful, wonderful grace of Jesus Christ, it would be this Peter who would become one of the rocks of the Christian church, one of the greatest church leaders we've ever had. He would go on to live the rest of his days in freedom, faithfully following Jesus and feeding his sheep, living a transformed life of grace and the mercy of Jesus Christ, set free from his shame, from his guilt, and from all the pain of his failure. Like, friends, may we come to Jesus to receive this same grace this morning. And as we come to a close, maybe the band could come back up. Friends, the challenge for us this morning is not just to receive this grace, but to know that in the church of Jesus Christ, the same grace we receive is the grace we extend to others. The grace we receive is the grace we extend to others. The same forgiveness we receive is the forgiveness we extend to others. And Jesus was serious about this. He was really serious about his followers embodying this forgiveness. In Matthew 6, he says this: for if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. Like, let's just name it. These are strong words from Jesus. But to Jesus, this is central to the gospel. It is of paramount importance. But so often when people have wronged us, how easy is it to store it up against them? We let orgizomenos take root in our hearts. That anger that we nurture, we let it grow in us, we let it fester, we ruminate on it, we replay things in our heads over and over until it becomes a well of bitterness. But as followers of Jesus Christ, we have to choose a better way. And the point at the heart of it is simply this: have you received a grace which you didn't deserve? Have you received a grace which you didn't deserve? Have you received a forgiveness that you didn't pay for, but someone else paid for it? Like, the evidence that you have received this grace, the evidence that you have received this forgiveness, is that you can walk in the freedom of extending it to other people. That's the evidence. That you can take the orgizomenos, the anger, the wrath, the bitterness to the foot of the cross and exchange it for freedom and for joy and for new life in Jesus Christ. The fullness of life he is inviting you into. And I invite us all to do that this morning. We're going to respond. We're going to have a time of response to what we've just heard by coming to the table of communion in just a moment. In fact, guys, maybe feel free to bring the altar out. Thank you. It's interesting, in the passage in Matthew 5, which I started with at the beginning, where Jesus addresses orgizomenos, the anger that sits at the heart of so much bitterness. He goes on to say this. Thanks, guys. Where he first talks about that anger, that orgizomenos, he goes on to say this, that if you're offering your gift at the altar, and at the altar you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. Now in the context, people have traveled to Jerusalem. They've walked for days. So the idea, he's literally saying, no, go back. Walk back 2 days, back to Jerusalem. Go and seek reconciliation. Don't come to this altar to receive forgiveness unless there's a willingness to extend that same forgiveness, to be reconciled to those who have hurt you. Go and be reconciled. Extend the same grace that you know you'll receive and be set free. Live into the freedom that forgiveness brings, the freedom that I've won for you. So in response to this, we're going to take a moment and we're going to say a corporate prayer of confession. Confessing our own failures before God. Confessing the grace that we need, the forgiveness that we need from him. I want to pray that together. And after that, we're going to hold a period of silence. And I just want to name, forgiveness, it's of paramount importance, but it doesn't mean it's easy, man. It can be really hard. Some of those wells of anger or bitterness can be deep. And also there's people have suffered evil things. Bad things have happened. There are genuine, real victims in the world. There'll be real victims of awful stuff in this room. But after this prayer of confession, we're just going to hold a time of silence. And it might be a couple of minutes. It might be a few minutes. And I want you to bring that anger and that unforgiveness to the foot of the cross. Just let Jesus into that wound. Do everything you can in your power to extend that forgiveness. Maybe you'll have to wake up tomorrow and do it all over again. My sense is you probably will. How many of us know forgiveness is a journey that we have to do often? Strong nods from Liberty. Over and over again. But know that there is a mountain of grace for you, and Jesus longs to meet you in that wound. Forgiveness isn't easy. It's really hard, but we can only do it because of the power of the Spirit at work in us. And this is what the church is meant to be. When people walk through those doors and experience a group of people who just have a grace and a tenderness and a kindness and a graciousness that you can't find anywhere else in the world. Jesus is serious about it, so we should be too. So we're going to pray this prayer of confession together, and then we'll spend a few minutes of silence as we seek to extend forgiveness and invite Jesus into those places in our hearts that often we'd rather keep in the shadows. Let's pray this together. Father eternal, giver of light and grace, we have sinned against you and against our neighbor in what we have thought, in what we have said and done, through ignorance, through weakness, through our own deliberate fault. We have wounded your love and marred your image in us. We are sorry and ashamed and repent of all our sins. For the sake of your Son, Jesus Christ, who died for us, forgive us all that is past and lead us out from darkness to walk as children of light. Amen.